Welcome to Birmingham, where Theresa May says she wasn't watching Boris Johnson's speech, but hundreds of activists were. Some 1,500 crowded into a hall at the Conservative conference Fringe to hear the former Foreign Secretary denounce Mrs May's Chequers plan as an outrage, with loud applause from the audience as he declared, "If we bottle Brexit now, the people of this country will find it hard to forgive." Our political editor Gary Gibbon reports, and a warning, there is flash photography.
Whoa! Stop!
A manic scrum for the great performer. But this is a divided Conservative Party. Not everyone is queuing to grab a seat.
Are you going to make time in the diary to go and see Boris Johnson?
No, I'm not. No, why would I do that? Well, because I've sort of heard it all before. I'm waiting for some details. Not flowery language and sort of classical references.
For years, leaderships have dreaded the day Boris Johnson visits conference and planned distractions.
There would always, every year, be a conversation about, can we move some announcements up? One year, should the Chancellor's speech be moved to the same day to steal the headlines? And nothing much has changed. And I say that was when Boris was part of the team.
They put out an immigration policy announcement to draw attention away from him. But all the big queues were still at Boris Johnson's end of the conference centre.
It's a bit more civilised than the Harrod sale, I think.
What made you queue so early for this?
He's always interesting, he's always good value, he's always funny.
Would he make a good leader, a good Prime Minister?
In my view, actually, no.
You're sloping off before Theresa May, but you'll queue early for Boris Johnson.
Absolutely.
I just can't understand how we need a leader at the moment who believes in Brexit. Half the cabinet don't believe in Brexit.
Could he still pull a full house? Newspapers were pre-briefed. Boris Johnson wasn't just attacking Theresa May's approach on Brexit, but would lay out a policy stall beyond that.
The public line is always, we're not after Theresa May. This is just about getting her to change policy.
Boris is a fantastic advocate for a free society and a great Brexit, and I'm here today because I want to hear him talk about that.
Ditto.
He attacked Theresa May's ending of stop and search, Philip Hammond's call for higher taxes to pay for the NHS, and Michael Gove's message to Brexiteers to back Chequers and negotiate something better later.
Do not believe that we can somehow get it wrong now, bodge it now and fix it later. Get out properly in a year or two. That is a total fantasy. That is a total fantasy. This is the moment to chuck Chequers. And I hope you will join me in urging our friends in government to deliver what the people voted for. To back Theresa May in the best way possible by softly and quietly and sensibly supporting her original plan.
Theresa May's allies thought it wasn't quiet, sensible, or backing her.
He speaks for the grassroots of the Conservative Party and not just a minority. We are talking the overwhelming grassroots of this party, and let's hope that Mrs May is taking note.
If she doesn't?
In my view, she has to go.
Yeah, I'm for Theresa May, not Boris Johnson.
But you came here?
I came here because I was interested. I wanted to see what he had to say, but yeah.
Speaking to the BBC, the Prime Minister showed her irritation.
Well, there are one or two things that Boris said that I am cross about. He wanted to tear up our guarantee to the people of Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom.
Less of a crush for the Home Secretary in the main conference hall. The decoy announcement that didn't quite work was substantial, confirming the government wants to stop mass migration of lower-paid workers from the EU.
A skills-based, single system that is opened up to talent from across the world. A system that doesn't discriminate between any one region or any one country. A system based on merit.
The government also said it wouldn't throw in piles of work visas when it was trying to sweeten future trade deals with countries like India. That got a slapdown from the CBI.
This feels, I have to say, to businesses today like something of a wrong turning. By dismissing the value of lower skilled workers to the UK, it ignores the needs of many of our businesses, and we really hope this is not the final word.
There'll be more on immigration when the Prime Minister closes the conference with her speech tomorrow, hoping she can pull back any support Boris Johnson pulled over with his raucous day trip.
Well, Gary Gibbon joins us live now. Away from the clatter of this conference, what's actually happening on the ground in Brussels with negotiations?
I'm getting a feeling, talking to people around here and elsewhere, that there is what I think in lunar terms is called a docking procedure going on. There has been movement on the British side. There was originally a plan to have a deadline on us staying in something that looked and smelled and walked a lot like the customs union. It looks as though the government is ready to lose that deadline, to admit that until such time as the EU sign up to what replaces it, there can't be a replacement. On the EU side, maybe some acceptance of the idea that we can have single market rules, as it were, the common rule book, as it is called in the government's plans, for goods without having services in there. But they want stronger commitments from the government on how we're not going to diverge in the way we run our economy from the rest of Europe. So you can see some sort of coming together there potentially. And then on Northern Ireland, where there's been a lot of noise here, the DUP MPs have been traipsing around here all day. Some movement there as well. The EU wants more checks on animals that go east-west, and the government's saying, no, can we just keep the number low? But if they're just talking about checks on animals going east-west, well, you can see that there is scope for agreement there if they can just agree a number in the middle, something like that. Also some dispute about whether goods in Northern Ireland that have come from Britain should be checked in the shop in Belfast, as it were, rather than in Dublin when it's crossed. Disputes over that sort of thing. You can see some coming together, but one thing I can tell you, though, is there's no way after today here that what emerges, if the Prime Minister gets a deal, will be called the Chequers deal. I think they'll think of something much more sellable to this party, maybe call it the EU-UK Free Trade Agreement.
What about the one that's called Boris Johnson? I mean, in, out, up, down?
Well, people around Theresa May are hoping, praying, thinking, genuinely, I think, that he may have overplayed his hand here and in recent days and weeks, that his share price is down a bit. But the most interesting thing, I think, that came out of that meeting was looking at a list, it was accidentally left around, of how many MPs were due to turn up. Because, of course, this all comes back down to a vote in the House of Commons if the Prime Minister gets a deal. There were 20 or so MPs' names down there. I'm not sure they were all in there. One of them I spoke to who was in there wasn't sure he was going to vote against Chequers. You kind of assume someone who went all the way over, traipsed all the way over there and was part of the fanatical rally might be. And I think the government might extract a little bit of hope from that moment.
Gary Gibbon. Well, attracting workers is one thing. Actually keeping jobs in Britain post-Brexit may well be another. In Paris, 2 of Europe's most senior car bosses issued warnings today about the future of their UK factories if there is no Brexit deal. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, is there. Siobhan.
Well, John, today I met with Carlos Tavares, the combative boss of PSA Group that makes Vauxhall in Britain, and with Johan van Zyl, the man in charge of Toyota in Europe. Now, between them, they employ some 6,000 workers in Britain, and their message for Theresa May today was simple: get us a free trade deal, or those factories and those jobs will be put at risk. Not just, John, from the short-term factory stoppages we've heard many of them talk about in recent weeks, but also in the long term, from the wholesale potential shifting of car production out of the UK to here in Europe.
Selling cars, French style. Dancers among the glitz and glamour of the Paris Motor Show, but with European car bosses dancing to the same tune on Brexit, could the shine soon be coming off one of Britain's most successful industries?
It's Paris, and there's no doubting which French brand believes it has centre stage. Peugeot is part of the fabric of France, but the group also owns the British manufacturer Vauxhall. And while this beast isn't going anywhere, in the teeth of Brexit, the fate of Vauxhall and thousands of its workers is far less certain.
We need a deal, that's the message. Nothing more, and a deal based on free trade.
PSA Group, which owns Peugeot, Citroën and Vauxhall, is run by Carlos Tavares, the tough, cost-cutting Portuguese boss who's turned the UK business round. The Vauxhall factory at Ellesmere Port has become a flashpoint for Brexit. Get a good deal and it survives and thrives. No deal and future car models could be built on the continent instead. Workers say they're desperate for clarity.
I spoke to some of your workers at Ellesmere Port yesterday. They say all they want is certainty that they will carry on making vehicles beyond 2021. Can you give them that certainty?
Well, that's a good question, and that's a question that they need to ask the Brits.
But they're asking you as their boss.
Yeah, but I will decide based on the decision of the UK government. If there is a final call with a free trade and open trade, then it's fine, we move on. And everybody gets the benefit of it. If they cannot reach a deal, then we have to face the consequences of the vote.
That sounds ominous, though, that they'll have to face the consequences. Might that mean production shifting outside the UK?
That's something that we cannot exclude.
And here's why. Because no deal would lead to punitive tariffs on the car components needed to build the Astra, 3/4 of which are imported from the EU. And that, the boss says, would push up the price for British buyers.
That would create a huge inflation in the pricing of the UK market. So the final consumer in the UK would pay for it. Or we would have to right-size our operations if we don't have enough customers to buy cars at a higher price.
Right-sizing means more job cuts? You've already had substantial job cuts at Ellesmere.
That's what we will decide with our union partners.
Reacting to Mr. Tavares, though, the Unite Union told Channel 4 News there will be no decision. They'll resist any attempt for job cuts at Vauxhall. And they'll no doubt be guarding the 2,500 UK jobs building this new Toyota model in Derby. The boss perhaps less sharp-edged, but the answer equally uncompromising.
The clear message is if the competitiveness of our operations in the UK is damaged by a no deal, we may have to move operations or production elsewhere.
Yes, that is true. We've said it from the start that if our competitiveness is negatively impacted on, it's a logical business conclusion.
And again, it's tariffs that would drive the business away.
You will talk hundreds of millions.
Hundreds of millions every year in additional tariffs.
That's right.
Which then makes that plant, those plants, your two plants, uncompetitive? Is that enough to tip the balance?
It is a big number and it will have a big impact.
Theresa May is, of course, insisting that she can get a good deal and has given verbal, and in Toyota's case at least, financial assurances. But in Europe, politicians insist there is no easy route ahead. As time runs down to the Brexit deadline, Britain's car industry faces an uneasy limbo. Car bosses warn they'll watch and wait for the picture to unfold, but then they'll act. And that might not be so pretty.
One final thought, John. You know, this whole Brexit issue is much more pressing for the workers at the Vauxhall plant in Ellesmere because they know the next big investment decision is due. But tonight, a warning from the unions that they will continue to press Mr. Tavares, appealing to him that, in their words, workers deserve nothing less than certainty over their futures. John.
Siobhan Kennedy in Paris. Now, unfortunately, we were hoping to have an interview with the Prime Minister, as is traditional at party conferences over the last 3 decades. Sadly, that was not to be this week. But if you're watching, Prime Minister, we'd still love to talk to you. There'll always be a chair for you on Channel 4 News. Well, now, I've been talking to the Education Secretary, Damien Hines, and we'll be hearing what he has to say about education issues in a moment. But I began with Brexit and Boris Johnson, asking if it was time to chuck Chequers.
Chequers, the proposal put together at Chequers, the white paper, is the proposal that's on the table. There is no counter-proposal from the European Union institutions, and no one's come forward with any credible way of making other proposals work. It's a balanced proposal. It's practical. It's pragmatic. It's a good basis to work from, and we need to get on with those discussions with the European Union and get the deal done.
So you're not one of the cabinet members favouring a Canada-style deal?
I'm favouring the British government policy, which is the proposal put together at Chequers, which, as I say, it's a balanced approach. It means that we can, have frictionless trade across borders, but we will control free movement. It means not having, indefinite large amounts of money going to the EU. So it delivers on the referendum in a good way.
Now, I mean, love him or hate him, Boris Johnson has been here today. Hundreds of people have been to see him, queuing outside, 1,500 altogether.
Well, I don't have a view on something I didn't see.
No,
It's an
you've
open.
got someone you have seen more than you perhaps want to.
It's a part of conference. We have many fringe events. There are many interesting discussions, and people go and take
But
part in
I'm
all
asking
sorts of
about
different
Boris
things.
Johnson.
Please do.
1,500 people turn out at a Conservative Party conference to listen to somebody who's absolutely at variance with your policies.
Well, look, I mean, there are a lot of people here at this conference. You'll see more in the main hall, clearly.
That's more than in your speech.
That was more than in my speech, but you'll see more tomorrow. Look, the mood in this conference, the mood when you talk to delegates, is people want to get on with doing these negotiations. The Chequers proposal is a good basis to work from. Of course, you've got to have those discussions. But there's also many other things that the government is doing, and we need to be focusing on them. So I've been focusing on what I've been saying about education and skills and seizing the opportunities for a global Britain and a post-Brexit world, making sure we make the technological change going on in the world work for us, not against us. These are the important things as well that we need to be talking about.
But that's not what people are talking about. And the fact is, this has been a shop window.
I keep hearing people talking about it.
Conservatives have ever experienced in history.
Well, you may and probably are talking to different people, perhaps, from the people I'm talking to, but I do hear people talking about all those things, the challenges we face, the opportunities we face, and how we need the Conservative government to be delivering on these things, and we can't risk having the Labour government undoing all the progress that's been made.
I've been in the hall and out of the hall. In the hall, there's been loyalty to the government. There's been very little criticism at all. Out of the hall, the place is awash with it.
You've always heard a range of opinions at a party conference. That's kind of partly what it's for, to let people come together and discuss issues. But also, we know there's a really important job to be done in a matter of months and weeks to make sure that we get the best Brexit deal for Britain. People know that is incredibly important. The Prime Minister is doing a fantastic job, and we all need to get behind that and make sure it really is the best deal that can be done.
My heart is torn.
Well, now joining me are the journalist Rachel Johnson, a Johnson but not a Leaver, and the columnist Matthew Paris, and also by Ian Martin. Matthew, last hurrah or the coming man?
It did have a little bit of a sort of comeback tour feeling about it, all the old jokes, all the old tricks. It was a little bit ragged as a speech. The hall loved it because the hall was composed almost exclusively of people who love Boris. It did not bomb as a speech, but nor would I call it a great barnstorming performance. I just didn't have the impression that he actually has a plan or a strategy. He just loves the audience and the applause.
Well, I mean, naturally you love Boris, but what's your reading as a journalist of what you beheld today?
I thought that he had I think the conference was waiting for Boris to put his tank squarely on Theresa May's lawn. And he didn't, but he left them sort of within vision of Downing Street, so she could look through the net curtains of her new immigration policy and see Boris's tank. And this will be her guide. This will guide her as she goes forward into the October summit, where she has to put Chequers to the 27. And if that doesn't fly, I think she's in serious trouble.
Are the tanks on the lawn, or have the tracks begun to come off?
I think the tracks have begun to come off, actually. I thought there was a real faded grandeur about it. I mean, it was a pretty well-constructed speech, very impressively delivered, as you would anticipate. But I think that part of the problem for him is now that he's been in the public eye so long. He's breaking that rule that Gordon Brown used to have, which is the 7-year rule. It's only about 7 years that the public will take being told that you're the person, that you're the coming person for. And Boris has now been really massively famous since about 2004, 2005. So that's a problem for him. And also just that what's coming up next is complex. It's going to involve some compromises. British politics is going to be very, very difficult in the next 7 or 8 weeks. And there wasn't, what I detect as a Leaver, as a moderate Leaver, there wasn't a clear plan, for example, on the Northern Ireland border, not one that I could detect anyway.
You've just said the explosive word, plan. Did you see a plan, or do you know a plan?
I think the Boris's plan, and gosh, I hate having to talk about Boris rather than Brexit as a whole.
It's inevitable as a Johnson journalist.
On today of all days, is that the Irish border is not the obstacle that the EU is making it out to be, and the tail is wagging the dog. And if we can just forget about that problem, and some magical thinking and some technological solutions will solve it. And we go back to Phil Hammond's interview earlier in the week, where he mimicked the style, which is that, when push comes to shove, we will come up with a solution. That's the plan.
I don't think there's a plan, and I think that life is too short to deconstruct Boris Johnson's mental processes. I don't think there's even in his own head.
Lifetime is not long enough.
A plan. But were he to have a plan, he should take into account this conference with Conservative representatives, on the whole loyal folk. There's beginning to be a bit of a feeling of the wagons circling around Theresa May to protect her. They don't like the way she was treated in Salzburg by Donald Tusk. They don't like the way Boris has been shin-kicking. They didn't think it was funny, him running through the fields of what weren't wheat. Anyway, there's quite a protective feeling towards her, and I would have directed the speech.
Matthew,
yes.
I've not usually risen to correct you, because as you know, I'm a huge fan of yours. But the fields of wheat, Boris has been besieged by paparazzi for several weeks. The field of wheat.
But it was bonkers.
It's where he runs. So I'm sorry, it was not a deliberate
in those
trolling.
pants.
You've seen his. I'm not. I refuse. Just please.
But is the party? Let's be serious. I mean, is the party? The wagons may be circled round, as you put it. But in those Western movies, wagons catch fire, arrows come pouring in.
Yes.
Is there a danger the party may blow up?
No, not at the moment. It may later on. She's going to get through this conference actually stronger than she left it. There'll be huge support waiting for her in her speech tomorrow. She'll be fine tomorrow. Her problems are with the world. They are not with the Conservative Party.
He said later on.
Later on is pretty soon, because I think Matthew's absolutely right, but I would regard this as a holding operation. And really, things start to get very, very interesting when Theresa May has spoken tomorrow and everyone then heads back to London. And you then go into a 6, 7, 8 week period which is going to be unlike anything I think any of us have experienced in British politics. The closest comparison would arguably be May 1940.
Can she carry the party through a deal?
I think that what is happening is that the Cabinet is giving her the time at this conference and the dignity, and is then expecting some moves away from Chequers, probably allowing her to call whatever she comes up with Chequers based, but not actually what she announced at Chequers. So they're anticipating some kind of shift in the next few days and weeks.
Meantime, no grain of policy. I mean, normally you have a jam-packed conference full of policies all over the place. Nothing.
Tips for waiters?
Tips for waiters is one. I could have learnt by heart a list of small announcements.
Yeah.
But the Conservative Party knows that small announcements just won't cut it. No one wants to think about anything but Brexit, and there's just no point in trying to showcase anything short of cutting income tax completely or something like that.
I think there are two conferences here. There's the conference on the surface, which is all about leadership and the stuff we've been talking about. Underneath the surface, actually, I think the Tories should take quite a bit of heart. It's busier in terms of activists and fringe meetings than I've seen it in many a year. So something is happening. They were spooked by Corbyn's success last week at Labour conference, and they know that they have a fight on their hands.